Welcome back. In this video, we will talk about Angular components. Components are the most basic UI building block of an Angular app. An Angular app contains a tree of Angular components. A component controls a patch of screen called a view. It controls a part of your web page. Technically, a component is nothing but a class, but with a component decorator on top of this class. This decorator @component is making a normal class to a Angular component. For now, you can think the component decorator as a simple function which takes few parameters. This decorator identifies the class immediately below it as a component class and specifies its metadata. This is nothing but the metadata of a component. The metadata for a component tells Angular where to get the major building blocks that the component needs to create and present the component and its view. Here the metadata is nothing but the input parameters that we pass to the component decorator. That is nothing but the selector, template URL, style URLs. This is nothing but the metadata of this particular app component. The template URL, that is the HTML file, and the app component.ts file, and also this CSS file, all these three together makes the view of that particular component. Here in the code you can see that app component is just a class with no special Angular notation or syntax at all. It is not a component until you mark this as one with component decorator. So if we remove this component decorator, this will just act like a normal class. It will not be called as a component. Coming to the metadata, a selector, the first parameter is the selector. So selector is a CSS selector that tells Angular to create and insert an instance of this component wherever it finds the corresponding tag in the template HTML. For example, the selector for this component is app-root. If at any place the application HTML contains app-root, the Angular inserts an instance of app component view between those tags. If you see the index.html file, here we are calling this app-root as a HTML tag which is placed between these body tags. So our app component will be replaced between these body tag that we can see in the browser. The next one is template URL. Template URL is the relative address of the component's HTML template, and a template is a form of HTML that tells the Angular how to render the component in the browser. For our app component.html is our template. So the root folder of these two files, app component.ts and app component.html, are the same. That is the reason why we have kept / as the relative URL. And this app component.html will define how the browser should render this app component. The next one is style URLs. Style URLs is an array of relative URLs for the CSS style sheets. So we can have one or more style sheets for this particular component. As we have only one CSS file for this app component. We just have placed only one CSS file relative URL. There is another way to write your template content. That way is you can provide the HTML template and styles in line as the value of template and styles properties. Let me comment out these two properties, that is template URL and style URLs. We will not be using this app component.html and app component.css file to render this app component. We will directly load with the inline styles. The component decorator also takes another parameter called template. Instead of template URL, you can also choose template. Either of these you can use, either the template URL or the template. And you can write multi-liner inline HTML in this template directly in the .ts file itself. To write your multi-liner HTML, you have to write this HTML between backticks. You can find backticks just left side of the one and below the escape key in your keyboard. Let me copy the content of HTML from app component.html and I am pasting it inside this backticks. I can also hit enter over here and add another tag h2 heading is the content, and along with this template let's use styles instead of using the style URLs. Just like the style URLs and template URLs and template, so you can instead of having this separate CSS file, you can directly write your styles using this styles property inside your TypeScript only. So I am using styles now to write the inline styles just inside my TypeScript file. Just like style URLs, for the styles also accepts array and you can write as many CSS styles you want. Let me copy the CSS from my app component.css file and I have to keep it inside this single ticks, that is single quotes, and I have to keep this in single line only. Let me save it and open the browser. Still it is exactly same, and the only difference is the new h2 tag that we have added in our inline style, but we did not use the template.html or the CSS file. You can also write another CSS styles just by comma separated. For h2 let me write one style. So I want to keep a background color as green and the color of text as white, and let me go to the browser. There you go. So the background color has been changed to green and the color of the text has been changed to white for the h2 tag. So here what we are doing is we are applying multiple styles just inline, just by using one property styles inside our TypeScript file only. We are not using any HTML file or any CSS file. Just with one file we have created our own component along with its template and along with its CSS styles. This way of writing a component works fine when the component is small, but when the component is bigger and when you have a lot of HTML code to write in your component template, in that case it is always better to separate your template in a different HTML file so that you can utilize all the IDE features of auto intelligence and readability kind of features, and it is also useful while debugging. So I suggest you to keep your template and also the style sheet in a separate files, because in a real-time applications our components will not be such small. So let me roll back these changes and I'll put all these HTML changes in the HTML file only. Okay, let me uncomment this template URL and let me take this entire h1 and h2 tags and let me put it inside my HTML, and I am removing this template property, and let me add this h2 styles in my CSS file. I have to remove this single quote. So here if you see, I am getting all my intelligence and it is easy to read. So that is the reason why I prefer to have these things in a separate file. Let me remove this styles property as well. Let's open the browser and see if there is any change. No change, it is exactly same. So whether we are implementing it from using different files, different HTML and CSS files, or whether we are writing in an inline style, but still it is giving you the same output. But as a developer convenience, we are going to write the components in a different files. Okay, now let's create our own component and move this app component code to our newly created component. As we discussed, component consists of a class file, that is TypeScript file, and a template file, that is HTML file, and also a style sheet file, that is CSS file. So to create a component, we need to create all these files manually, or we can leverage Angular CLI commands to create our component. As creating multiple files is a big task, so I am going to create the component using Angular CLI command, and we want to create the component under the app folder. So we should go to the app folder. So let me go to the app folder. So to go to the app folder, first I have to go inside of src folder. So right now I am in my Angular folder. Let me go to src, cd space src, hit enter, and then cd space app. Once you go to your required folder, the command to create Angular component is ng space g space c and your component name. So here I am naming this component as home and hit enter. The Angular command has created all the files along with the file spec.ts, that is a testing file. We can leave this file for now, we can ignore this one, and by default it appends the component to our all file names. So we just entered the component name as home, so it has appended home.component.html, home.component.spec.ts, home.component.ts, home.component.css file, and it has also created one folder for our component. If you don't want to have one folder, if you just want to have only the files, you can just append flat over here in the command, so that it will not create your folder, it will directly create the flat files. But I prefer to have a different folder for my components, so that is the reason why I did not create the flat structure. Now we want to use this home component in our application. So to use any component in the application, it has to be registered in any one of the module in the application. As we have only one root module now, we need to register our home component in the root module or the app module. Our root module is nothing but our app.module.ts file, that is the app module. To register the component in the module, we have to go to the module file. We have already inside this app module file, and we should add our component inside the declarations array of the ng module decorator in this module. So for the app module, just like the component decorator, we will have the ng module decorator that makes this plain class as a module. So this module also takes few parameters, just like our component, as it is taking the template URLs and the style URL. Similar to that, this ng module will take the declarations as input parameter. This declaration says that all the components that are being used inside this module. So whatever the component that we want to use inside our app module, that should be presented inside this declarations array. If you can see this, we already have this app component and home component inside this declarations array. This has done by the Angular CLI. The app component has been added to these declarations when we have created our application itself, and the home component has been added to these declarations when we have just created our home component using the CLI command ng space g space c home. If we have created the component in a manual way, that is by creating our own component.ts file and component.html file and component.css file, in that case we should come to this app module.ts file and we should add this home component inside the declarations array. Okay, now let's move the content from app component to home component. So let's move the content of app component.html, Control A, Control X, and let's open the home component.html file, Control A, Control V, and let's go to app component.css file, Control A, Control X, and home component.css file. Let's copy the CSS file in home component.css file, save. I'm saving all the files, and let's go to the browser. We are not seeing anything. The reason is we have moved the content to the home component, but we are not calling the home component from the app component. We can call the component by using its selector. Let's go to the app component.html file, and before that let's see what is the selector for this home component. I'm opening home component.ts file. The selector for home component is app-home. So I'm copying it and go to this app component.html file, and the syntax for keeping a selector is same as HTML selectors. save the file and open the browser. There we go. We can see the data now, but if you observe one thing, in our heading H1 tag, we are not seeing our application name inside this my first app. My Angular is running. Here my Angular is missing. The reason is inside our home component.ts file we do not have a title variable, but inside our home component.html file we are trying to access this title variable. As there is no home title variable inside our home component.ts file, it is not displaying anything and it cannot access the app component.ts file title variable. This home component.html file is only associated with home component.ts file. So to show the title in our home component also, we have to copy the title from our app component.ts. So let's copy this title variable also. Control X and home component.ts, Control V. Let's save it. There we go. My Angular updated the value. So today we have learned how to create the selector and how to call this selector from a different we have learned how to create a component and how to call this particular component in a different component. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.